Okay, let's dive into a substance that is right at the heart of so much talk about recovery and healing, the peptide known as TB500. You've probably seen this name pop up everywhere, right? In performance circles, biohacking forums, it's a huge buzzword. But in this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise and give you the real story, separating the solid science from the speculation. So here's what we're going to cover. We'll look at what TB500 actually is, how it's supposed to work, what the science really says, how people are using it out in the wild, and finally, a much-needed reality check on its unregulated status. All right, first things first, let's get a really clear definition of what we're even talking about when we say TB500. Think of it like this. Your body already makes a protein called thymosin beta-4 that helps with healing. TB500 is basically a man-made synthetic piece of that protein. It was engineered to be a smaller, more stable fragment for research while still packing the regenerative punch of the original. And here we go. This is probably the single most important thing to understand right from the get-go. TB500 is not an approved medical treatment. It's not a supplement. It lives in this weird gray area where it's sold legally, but only for laboratory research purposes. So how is this peptide supposed to actually work inside the body? I mean, what's the biological magic that might give it all this healing potential? A really great way to picture it is to think of TB500 as a traffic controller for your body's little cellular repair crews. It's not some blunt instrument just forcing cells to grow. The idea is that its mechanism is way more sophisticated than that. It helps coordinate your body's own natural, incredibly complex healing processes. And this breaks down the 4 key ways it's thought to do that. First, it helps rebuild the internal skeletons of cells so they can move. Then, it helps direct those repair cells to the exact site of an injury. It also promotes the growth of new blood vessels, which is crucial for bringing in nutrients for repair. And finally, it might help dial down inflammation to support organized, effective healing, instead of just forming a bunch of scar tissue. Okay, so those are the proposed mechanisms. That's the theory. But what does the actual scientific research say? Is there any hard evidence to back any of this up? The preclinical research is definitely compelling. I mean, studies have shown potential benefits across a whole range of different tissues in lab settings. We're talking everything from faster skin and muscle repair to better outcomes after heart attacks and even protecting the brain after injury in animal models. But, and folks, this is a huge but that changes absolutely everything. These exciting results are almost entirely from animal models, like rats and mice. There is a massive lack of solid, large-scale human clinical trials to prove these effects are actually safe and work the same way in people. And this huge gap in human data, well, it leads us directly into our next section. How in the world are people actually using this research chemical outside of a controlled lab setting? Right. So since there are no official medical guidelines, no doctor is prescribing this, the protocols you see discussed online are basically a mashup. They're part guesswork from that preclinical animal research we just talked about, and part community anecdotes, a whole lot of trial and error. Generally, people who experiment with this stuff tend to follow a 2-stage approach. They'll start with a loading phase, using higher and more frequent doses, with the theory being to quickly saturate the body's tissues. And that's usually followed by a lower dose maintenance phase, just to keep those levels up. Now this is where it gets really interesting when you start looking at the numbers. This breaks down some of the different approaches you'll see. There's everything from a typical loading protocol to daily microdosing. But what's fascinating is that even though the frequency and the dose per shot can vary a lot, the total weekly amount people are using often lands in a pretty similar ballpark. So what we've got here is a substance with some really promising biology on one side and a community of self-experimenters on the other, all happening in a completely unregulated space. And that brings us to the all-important reality check. This slide just lays out the massive disconnect perfectly. On one side, you've got all the exciting claims you'll read on forums. Super fast recovery, amazing synergy with other peptides. And on the other side, you've got the cold, hard scientific facts. This is not an approved therapy. We have no clue about its long-term safety in humans, and the purity of what you're buying online is a total crapshoot. And these are the risks you simply cannot ignore. You have no idea if the vial you're holding actually contains what the label says it does, or if it's pure. You have no idea how it might interact with other medications you're taking. And remember that angiogenesis, the new blood vessel growth, well, in theory, a substance that encourages that could be incredibly dangerous if you have an undiagnosed cancer. And above all else, there is just zero long-term human safety data. None.
Just a quick note that this educational explainer has been brought to you by our sponsor.
If there's just one number you take away from this entire explainer, please let it be this one: 0. That is the number of FDA-approved medical therapies that use TB500 for human beings. Period. Ultimately, the story of TB500 leaves us with a really critical question to chew on. In this constant search for better recovery, where do we draw the line between being a pioneer and simply being a test subject? It really highlights that tension between our drive to push human limits and the careful, evidence-based process of medicine. Thanks for tuning in.